The golden horizon erupted with angry flames as the locomotive pulled into Ellsworth, Kansas, late that August afternoon in 1873. Lucille Palmer clutched her single valise with trembling hands, her heart racing not from the excitement of meeting her future husband, but from the wall of scorching heat and billowing smoke that greeted her instead. This wasn't how she had imagined her arrival in the West, her new life suddenly threatened before it could even begin. The station master frantically waved passengers off the train. "Wildfire's coming. Everyone evacuate immediately. Town's under evacuation orders." Lucille stood frozen on the platform, paralyzed by the chaos unfolding around her. Frightened passengers pushed past her, scattering in all directions like startled birds. She had nowhere to go, no one to meet her. The letter from Samuel Carson had been explicit he would be waiting at the station upon her arrival, but the platform was devoid of anyone resembling the man whose careful penmanship had wooed her through 6 months of correspondence. "Miss, you need to get moving," the station master shouted, his voice barely audible above the commotion. "I'm supposed to meet someone," Lucille called back, straining to be heard above the panic. "Mr. Samuel Carson, he's expecting me." The station master's face fell. "Carson, his ranch is directly in the path of the fire. He's probably trying to save what he can." He pointed toward the western edge of town. "Best find shelter in town until this passes." Clutching her valise tighter, Lucille watched as thick plumes of smoke darkened the sky. The air grew heavier with each passing moment, ash beginning to float down like perverted snowflakes. Around her, the last of the passengers had disappeared, leaving her alone with her fear and uncertainty. A horse's whinny cut through the roar of distant flames. Lucille turned to see a man on horseback galloping toward the station, his figure partially obscured by the thickening smoke. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, reared slightly as the rider pulled it to an abrupt halt. "Lucille Palmer," the man called, his voice deep and urgent. His face was smudged with soot, blue eyes piercing through the grime. Relief flooded through her. "Yes, that's me. I'm Samuel Carson," he said, extending a hand down toward her. "I apologize for the welcome, but we need to go. Now." Without hesitation, Lucille grasped his calloused hand. With surprising strength, he pulled her up behind him on the horse. She barely had time to secure her valise before they were off, galloping away from the station and toward the edge of town. "What about your ranch?" she shouted over the thundering hooves. "That's where we're heading," Samuel replied, urging his horse faster. "I've got men working to save what we can, but I couldn't leave you stranded." As they rode, Lucille took in her first real look at the man she had agreed to marry. His shoulders were broad beneath his soot-stained shirt, his frame solid against hers. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the determination in the set of his jaw. The town quickly gave way to open prairie, but instead of the golden grasslands she had imagined, Lucille saw only a landscape transformed by impending disaster. In the distance, a wall of flames advanced, consuming everything in its path. The smoke was thicker here, making it difficult to breathe. "Hold on tight," Samuel instructed as they veered off the main trail onto a narrower path that skirted along a creek bed. "Water's low from the drought, but it might give us some protection." Lucille wrapped her arms tighter around his waist, feeling the hard muscles beneath his shirt. This wasn't how she had pictured their first meeting. In her imagination, there had been polite introductions, perhaps an awkward but sweet first conversation on a pleasant ride to his ranch. Not this desperate race against nature's fury. They crested a small hill, and Samuel pulled the horse to a stop. Below them lay a modest but well-built ranch house with several outbuildings. Men scurried about, some leading frightened animals toward a stone corral while others filled buckets from a well. The fire was visible beyond the western pasture, perhaps a mile away but advancing steadily. "That's your home?" Lucille asked, her voice small against the distant roar of the fire. "Our home," Samuel corrected, giving her a quick glance over his shoulder. "If we can save it." The unexpected possessive sent a flutter through Lucille's chest, despite their dire circumstances. Samuel urged the horse forward again, descending toward the ranch at a controlled gallop. As they approached, a tall man with graying hair ran to meet them. "Sam, thank God you're back." "Fire's jumping faster than we expected. The Wilson place is already gone." Samuel dismounted in one fluid motion, then turned to help Lucille down. "This is Miss Palmer," he said, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "Lucille, this is Jim Hensley, my foreman." Jim tipped his hat despite the urgency of the moment. "Madam, wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "What's the situation?" Samuel asked, already leading his horse toward the water trough. "We've moved most of the stock to the north pasture by the river. The men are soaking the roofs and clearing brush around the buildings." "But Sam," Jim lowered his voice, though Lucille could still hear him, "we might need to consider cutting our losses and getting everyone to safety." Samuel's jaw tightened. "This ranch is everything I have, Jim." "It's all I can offer." His eyes flickered briefly to Lucille. "We fight until there's no fight left." Jim nodded, understanding passing between the two men. "I'll get back to it then." As the foreman hurried away, Samuel turned to Lucille. His expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry about this. You've come all this way, and this isn't the welcome I planned." "I understand," Lucille replied, trying to project a confidence she didn't quite feel. The reality of her situation was sinking in. She'd traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she knew only through letters, and now they might lose everything before they'd even begun. Samuel seemed to read her thoughts. "I promise you, Miss Palmer, I'll keep you safe. Even if we lose the ranch, we'll rebuild. I keep my promises." Something in his tone made her believe him. Despite the chaos around them, despite the danger advancing with every gust of wind, Lucille felt a sense of trust in this man she barely knew. "What can I do to help?" she asked, setting down her valise. Surprise flickered across Samuel's face, quickly replaced by appreciation. "You're not what I expected, Miss Palmer." "Neither is this situation, Mr. Carson," she replied with unexpected spirit. For the first time since her arrival, Samuel smiled, a brief flash of white teeth in his sooty face. "Fair enough. Can you help move supplies from the storage shed to the root cellar? Anything we can save might be needed later." Lucille nodded, and Samuel called over a young ranch hand to show her the way. As she followed the boy toward a small outbuilding, Lucille glanced back to see Samuel already issuing more orders, his commanding presence drawing the attention of everyone around him. The storage shed was packed with supplies, sacks of flour and beans, preserved meats, tools, and various household items. Lucille didn't wait for instructions. She grabbed what she could carry and followed the ranch hand to a partially underground cellar near the main house. For the next hour, she worked alongside the ranch hands, moving supplies, filling buckets with water, and helping wherever she was needed. Her traveling dress was soon soiled with dirt and sweat, her carefully arranged hair coming loose, but Lucille hardly noticed. There was something exhilarating about fighting alongside these strangers, these people who might soon become her family. Occasionally, she would catch Samuel watching her, a curious expression on his face. Each time their eyes met, he would give her a quick nod before returning to his tasks. Lucille found herself drawn to him in these moments, admiring his steady leadership as much as his physical presence. As the sun began to set, the fire's glow became more menacing against the darkening sky. The wind shifted, bringing thicker smoke and increasing the urgency of their preparations. Samuel gathered everyone in the yard between the house and barn. "Fire's less than half a mile out," he announced, his voice steady despite the dire news. "We've done what we can. Now it's time to make some hard choices." He surveyed the faces of his men. "Anyone who wants to head for town now, I understand. Those with families especially." A few men exchanged glances, but no one moved. "We're with you, boss," Jim said, speaking for the group. Samuel nodded, clearly moved by their loyalty. "All right, then. We've cleared the fire lines, soaked everything we can. Now we wait and see what happens." He turned to Lucille. "Miss Palmer, I think you should—" "I'm staying," she interrupted, surprising herself as much as him. "I didn't come all this way to run at the first sign of trouble." For a moment, Samuel looked like he might argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him otherwise. "Very well, but you stay close to me." As darkness fell completely, the wildfire created its own terrible light. The roar grew louder as it devoured the dry prairie grass, advancing like an angry beast. The heat became nearly unbearable even from a distance. Samuel positioned men around the property with wet blankets and buckets, ready to extinguish any flying embers that might land on the buildings. He and Lucille stood near the well, where they could quickly refill buckets as needed. "Tell me something about yourself," Samuel said suddenly, his eyes never leaving the approaching fire. "Something that wasn't in your letters." Lucille looked at him in surprise. "Now, with all this happening." "Especially now," he replied. "Helps keep the mind steady." She considered for a moment. "I'm terrified of spiders," she admitted. "Completely and irrationally so. My father once found me standing on the kitchen table screaming because a tiny spider was crawling across the floor." Samuel chuckled, the sound unexpectedly warm in the tense atmosphere. "I'll remember to check your boots for 8-legged visitors." "Your turn," Lucille prompted. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I almost gave up on finding someone." "On writing for a bride." His eyes met hers briefly. "Your first letter changed my mind. You described the sunset in Boston with such feeling that I thought maybe you could appreciate what I've built here." Before Lucille could respond, a shout went up from the eastern edge of the property. A spot fire had ignited from a flying ember, catching in a patch of dry grass near the chicken coop. Samuel was moving before the echo of the shout had died away, pulling Lucille with him toward the well. The next hours blurred into a hellish cycle of spot fires, exhaustion, and desperate measures. The main fire line reached the western edge of the property, but the freshly plowed fire breaks held it back from advancing further. Still, embers carried on the hot wind ignited smaller fires that required constant vigilance. Lucille worked alongside the men, her arms aching from carrying water, her lungs burning from the smoke. She lost track of time, aware only of the next task, the next emergency. Through it all, Samuel was a constant presence, directing, encouraging, working harder than anyone. It was well past midnight when the wind finally shifted, pushing the main body of the fire to the south of the ranch. The immediate danger began to recede, though everyone remained on alert for new spot fires. Exhausted, Lucille sank onto a bench outside the main house. Her face felt raw from the heat and smoke, her throat parched despite the water she'd been drinking. She closed her eyes for just a moment, allowing herself to acknowledge the bone-deep weariness. A gentle touch on her shoulder startled her. Samuel stood beside her, offering a cup of water. "You should rest," he said softly. She accepted the water gratefully. "Is it over?" "Not entirely. The fire's still burning, but it's moving away from us now." He sat beside her on the bench, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. We still need to watch for embers, but the worst has passed. In the firelight, Lucille could see him clearly for the first time. Without the layer of urgency and danger, she was struck by how handsome he was, not in a refined way like the men she'd known back east, but in a rugged, honest manner that appealed to her far more than she'd expected. "Your ranch is beautiful," she said, realizing she hadn't had a chance to tell him that yet. "Even in these circumstances, I can see why you love it so." Samuel looked around at the buildings still standing, the pastures beyond. "It's not much compared to what you left behind in Boston." "It's more," Lucille said with conviction. "This is a home you've built with your own hands. There's pride in that." He studied her face as if searching for insincerity but found none. "Thank you for staying, for helping. You could have gone to town with the others." "I meant what I said in my letters," she replied. "I was looking for a real partnership, not just security or convenience." A small smile touched his lips. "I think I got the better end of our arrangement, Miss Palmer." "Lucille," she corrected gently. "After fighting a wildfire together, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Lucille," he repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "And I'm Samuel, or Sam to most folks around here." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant crackling of the fire and the occasional shout from the men still patrolling the property. Despite everything, the danger, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, Lucille felt a surprising sense of peace. "You should get some sleep," Samuel said eventually. "I've had Jim prepare a room for you in the main house. It's not much, but it's clean and safe." Lucille nodded, suddenly aware of just how tired she truly was. "What about you? I'll keep watch a while longer." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "In the morning we can talk about everything else. What happens next?" She took his hand, feeling the calluses against her skin. "I'd like that." He walked her to the house, pointing out the room that would be hers. It was simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the eastern pasture. "I'll be outside if you need anything," Samuel said, lingering at the doorway. "Good night, Lucille." "Good night, Samuel," she replied, watching as he turned and walked back toward the yard. Alone in the room, Lucille finally allowed herself to process everything that had happened since she stepped off the train. She had come west expecting to meet a stranger who would become her husband. Instead, she had found herself in the middle of a battle against nature itself, fighting alongside the man whose letters had drawn her across the country. As she lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, Lucille realized something important. In those frantic hours of shared danger, she had learned more about Samuel Carson than months of correspondence could have revealed. She had seen his courage, his determination, his loyalty to the land and the people who depended on him. And somewhere amid the smoke and flames, she had begun to fall in love with him. Dawn broke with tentative rays of sunlight filtering through the smoke-hazed sky. Lucille woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. Her valise sat untouched in the corner where she'd left it. After washing her face in the basin of water someone had thoughtfully placed on the dresser, Lucille changed into a fresh dress, a simple blue calico, that seemed more appropriate for ranch life than her travel outfit. Outside, the ranch was already bustling with activity. Men were assessing damage, repairing fences, and tending to livestock that had been returned from the safety of the river. The air still smelled strongly of smoke, but the immediate danger had clearly passed. Lucille found Samuel near the barn, deep in conversation with Jim. Both men looked exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes suggesting they had gotten little, if any, sleep. Samuel noticed her approach and straightened, removing his hat briefly in greeting. "Good morning. I hope you managed to get some rest." "I did, thank you," she replied. "Though I see you didn't follow your own advice." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Too much to do." Jim excused himself with a nod to Lucille, heading toward a group of men working on a damaged section of fence. "How bad is it?" Lucille asked once they were alone. Samuel surveyed his property with a critical eye. "We were lucky. Lost the west pasture and about 20 acres of grazing land. One of the smaller outbuildings burned, and there's some damage to the corral, but the house and main barn are intact." He looked back at her. "The stock is safe, which is the most important thing. Without the cattle, there's no ranch." "That is fortunate," Lucille agreed. "And your neighbors," a shadow passed over Samuel's face. "The Wilsons lost everything. A few other spreads took heavy damage." "We were lucky the wind changed when it did." "And what about?" Lucille hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject that hung between them. "What about us? I understand if yesterday's events have changed your mind about our arrangement." Samuel looked genuinely surprised. "Changed my mind." "Why would you think that?" "You barely know me," Lucille pointed out. "And now there's so much rebuilding to be done. Perhaps a wife is an additional complication you don't need right now." "Lucille," Samuel said, his voice softening, "if yesterday showed me anything, it's that I made the right choice in writing to you." He took a step closer. "Most women would have fled at the first sign of danger. You stayed and fought alongside men who have been ranching for years." Heat rose to Lucille's cheeks at his praise. "I only did what was necessary." "No," he insisted. "You did more. You showed courage and determination that I've rarely seen." He hesitated before continuing. "If anything, yesterday's events made me more certain about our arrangement, but I understand if you've had second thoughts. This isn't the life you were promised in my letters." Lucille considered his words carefully. The Samuel Carson she had imagined from his letters had been a successful rancher offering stability and respect, if not immediate love. The reality was more complicated, a man fighting to maintain his dream in a harsh and unpredictable land. Yet there was something compelling about his quiet strength and unwavering determination. "I came west looking for purpose and partnership," she said finally. "Nothing I've seen has changed my mind about that. If you still want me as your wife, I'm honored to accept." Relief washed over Samuel's features. "I do," he said simply. "Though I should warn you, it won't be easy. Even without the fire, ranching life is hard. There are droughts, blizzards, market crashes. You don't need to list all the potential disasters," Lucille interrupted with a small smile. "I think I got a fair introduction yesterday." Samuel laughed, the sound warming Lucille more than she expected. "Fair point. Well then, if you're certain, perhaps we could speak to Reverend Davis in town next Sunday. That is, if you don't want more time to get acquainted first." "Sunday would be fine," Lucille agreed, surprising herself with how right the decision felt. A call from across the yard interrupted their conversation. Jim was waving to Samuel, pointing toward the western fence line where several men were gathered. "I need to see to this," Samuel said apologetically. "Mrs. Hollister, our cook, should have breakfast ready in the main house." "Please make yourself comfortable. We can talk more later." Lucille nodded, watching as he strode away. As he joined the men by the fence, she observed how naturally they deferred to him, how his presence seemed to organize and reassure them. It was clear that Samuel Carson was respected by those who worked for him, a good sign of a man's character. Her father had always said, in the main house, Lucille found a plump, friendly woman bustling around a large kitchen. Mrs. Hollister welcomed her warmly, setting out a plate of biscuits, eggs, and bacon that made Lucille realize how hungry she actually was. Mr. Carson's been talking about your arrival for weeks, Mrs. Hollister confided as she poured coffee. Never seen him so nervous as when he was writing those letters to you. Really? Lucille couldn't hide her surprise. Samuel's letters had been thoughtful but practical, betraying little emotion. Oh yes, the cook continued. Rewrote them multiple times, he did. Asked me once if I thought he should mention the wildflowers that bloom in the spring pasture, or if that would seem too frivolous. The thought of Samuel agonizing over his letters made Lucille smile. Did he mention the wildflowers in the end? No, Mrs. Hollister chuckled. Said he didn't want you thinking he was soft-headed. But he is a good man, Miss Palmer. The best I know. Works harder than anyone, treats his people fair, and he built this place from nothing. How long have you worked for him? Lucille asked, curious about the ranch's history. Going on 6 years now. Came here after my Albert passed. Mr. Carson was just starting out, then had the house and a small herd. Everything else he's built since. Mrs. Hollister wiped her hands on her apron. He doesn't talk much about the past, but I know he had it rough growing up. Makes him appreciate what he has now all the more. Lucille absorbed this information thoughtfully. Samuel had mentioned little about his background in his letters, focusing instead on his current circumstances and plans for the future. Another piece of the puzzle that was Samuel Carson fell into place. After breakfast, Lucille decided to explore the ranch more thoroughly in daylight. The main house was modest but well built, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a comfortable sitting room. The furnishings were simple but of good quality, and everything was meticulously clean despite the chaos of the previous day. Outside, the layout of the ranch revealed careful planning. The barn and outbuildings formed a protective semicircle around the house, with corrals and a small kitchen garden completing the inner yard. Beyond stretched pastures and grazing lands, some now blackened by the fire's path. As she walked, Lucille encountered several ranch hands who tipped their hats respectfully. They all seemed curious about her but maintained a polite distance. It was clear that her arrival and her decision to stay despite the fire had earned their initial respect. She found herself drawn to the western edge of the property, where the damage from the fire was most evident. The contrast was stark charred earth meeting untouched grassland where the fire breaks had held. In the distance, men were working to repair sections of fence that had been damaged. "It'll grow back greener than before," a voice said behind her. Lucille turned to find Samuel approaching, leading his horse. His face and clothes were streaked with fresh soot, suggesting he'd been examining the burned areas. "Nature has a way of renewing itself," he continued, coming to stand beside her. "The first rains will bring new growth. By next spring, you'd hardly know there was a fire." "Is that a metaphor, Mr. Carson?" Lucille asked with a slight smile. Samuel looked momentarily startled, then chuckled. "Perhaps it is. I'm not usually given to such philosophical thoughts." "I don't believe that," Lucille said. "Your letters revealed a thoughtful mind, even if you tried to hide it beneath practical concerns." He looked almost embarrassed. "Jim would say I was trying to impress you with fancy words." "Were you? Maybe a little," he admitted, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to the landscape. "I wanted you to understand that this isn't just land to me, it's a dream," Lucille finished for him. "I could tell. It's why I chose your letter over the others." This caught Samuel's full attention. "There were others." "Several," Lucille confirmed. "Merchants, a lawyer, even a banker, all offering comfort and security." "And yet you chose a rancher with modest means and uncertain prospects," Samuel said, his tone suggesting he was still puzzled by her decision. "I chose a man who was building something meaningful," Lucille corrected. "The others wanted a wife to complete an already established life. You offered partnership in creating something together." She gestured toward the ranch. "This may not be as grand as what some of the others could provide, but it's real. It's alive." Samuel studied her face as if seeing her anew. "You continue to surprise me, Lucille Palmer." "Good," she replied with unexpected boldness. "I hope to do so for many years to come." The week that followed settled into a rhythm that gave Lucille insight into what her life as Mrs. Carson would entail. The ranch gradually recovered from the wildfire's impact, with men working from dawn till dusk to repair damage and ensure the cattle had adequate grazing despite the lost pasture. Lucille found ways to make herself useful, helping Mrs. Hollister with meals for the ranch hands, organizing supplies, and even assisting with minor medical needs when one of the men suffered a burn while clearing debris. Her experience helping at her father's mercantile in Boston had given her organizational skills that proved valuable in managing the household. Samuel was often absent from sunrise to sunset, returning exhausted each evening. Despite his fatigue, he made efforts to spend time with Lucille after dinner, sometimes just sitting on the porch in companionable silence, other times sharing stories of the ranch's early days or asking about her life in Boston. These quiet evenings became precious to Lucille. She found herself watching for Samuel's return each day, enjoying the subtle changes in his demeanor when he was away from his men, how his voice softened, how occasional humor would break through his serious exterior. By unspoken agreement, they maintained propriety despite their impending marriage. Samuel continued to sleep in the bunkhouse with his men, giving Lucille privacy in the main house. The arrangement raised no eyebrows among the ranch hands, who seemed to respect their boss's traditional values. On Thursday evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the smoke-tinged sky with vivid oranges and purples, Samuel broached a subject that had apparently been on his mind. "I realized I never properly asked you," he said, his voice carrying a hint of embarrassment. "With the fire and everything that followed, I just assumed." He cleared his throat. "Lucille Palmer, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Touched by his formality, Lucille turned to face him fully. "I would be proud to be your wife, Samuel Carson." A smile transformed his features, softening the lines of fatigue and worry. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this around for days, waiting for the right moment." He tipped the contents into his palm, a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically, "but it was my mother's, the only thing of hers I have left." Lucille's breath caught. "It's beautiful," she whispered, genuinely moved by the gesture. "Are you certain you want me to have it?" "More certain than I've been about anything," Samuel replied, his blue eyes intent on hers. "She would have liked you, I think. She valued courage and determination above all else." Gently, he took Lucille's left hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit almost perfectly. "Consider this a proper engagement," he said softly. "We'll be married on Sunday as planned, but I wanted you to have this now." The weight of the ring felt right on Lucille's finger, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it always." For a moment, they sat in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Lucille found herself studying Samuel's face, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the way his hair curled slightly where it met his collar. She wondered what it would be like to touch him, to feel his arms around her. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel leaned forward slightly, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips. Lucille felt her heart quicken, anticipation building in her chest. But then a shout from the bunkhouse broke the moment, and Samuel pulled back, a flush rising on his tanned cheeks. "Sunday," he said softly, almost to himself. "Just 3 more days. Lucille nodded, both disappointed and charmed by his restraint. In Boston, she had known men who would have taken liberties at the slightest encouragement. Samuel's respect for her, and for the vows they would soon take, only increased her growing affection for him. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the skies finally free of smoke after a light rain the previous evening. Lucille stood in her room, nervously smoothing the front of her best dress, a cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim that she had packed specifically for this occasion. Mrs. Hollister fussed around her, arranging Lucille's hair and chattering about the small celebration planned for their return from town. Nothing fancy, mind you, but the boys wanted to do something special. They've grown quite fond of you already. That's very kind of them, Lucille replied, touched by the gesture. She had indeed formed tentative friendships with several of the ranch hands, who had begun to treat her with a protective deference that suggested they already considered her the ranch's mistress. A knock at the door announced Jim's arrival. "Wagon's ready whenever you are, Miss Palmer," he called through the closed door. "Mr. Carson's waiting outside." "Thank you, Jim," Lucille called back. "I'll be right there." With a final glance in the mirror, Lucille took a deep breath to steady her nerves. This was at the culmination of the journey she had begun months ago, when she first responded to Samuel's advertisement. She was about to marry a man she had known for barely a week, in a place thousands of miles from everything familiar. Yet strangely, she felt no doubt, no urge to reconsider. In the short time she had known Samuel, she had seen his character tested by crisis, and had found him to be everything his letters had suggested and more. If this wasn't love yet, it was certainly the foundation for it. Lucille found Samuel waiting by the wagon, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, slightly outdated but well-maintained. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, and the effect was striking. When he turned and saw her, the open admiration in his eyes made her blush. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." The drive to Ellsworth took about an hour, during which Samuel pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. Lucille was struck by how different the landscape appeared compared to her arrival. Where she had first seen only smoke and danger, she now recognized beauty in the rolling prairie and distant hills. Ellsworth itself was a typical frontier town, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a mix of businesses catering to both local residents and the cattle trade that had made the town prosperous. Several people greeted Samuel as they made their way to the small white church at the end of the street. Reverend Davis was waiting for them, a kindly older man with twinkling eyes and a welcoming smile. "Samuel, good to see you, and this must be Miss Palmer." "Pleased to meet you, Reverend," Lucille said, shaking his offered hand. "I understand congratulations are in order for saving your ranch from the fire," the Reverend said to Samuel. "Word spread about how you and your men fought it back. And I hear your bride to be joined in the effort before she'd even properly arrived." Samuel's hand found Lucille's, giving it a gentle squeeze. "She's stronger than she looks," he said, pride evident in his voice. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. With Jim and the Reverend's wife as witnesses, Lucille and Samuel exchanged vows in the sunlit church. Lucille's voice remained steady as she promised to love, honor, and cherish the man before her, and Samuel's deep voice carried conviction as he made the same promises in return. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel hesitated only briefly before leaning down to kiss her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful of their public setting, but Lucille felt its impact down to her toes. Her first kiss as a married woman, from a man who was no longer a stranger but not yet fully known to her. After the ceremony, Samuel surprised her by leading her not immediately back to the wagon, but to the town's small hotel. "I've arranged for us to stay in town tonight," he explained, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I thought you might appreciate a proper wedding night away from the ranch and all its demands, but if you'd rather return home—" "No," Lucille said quickly, touched by his consideration. "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." Relief crossed his features. "I've also made a reservation at the hotel restaurant for dinner. It's not fancy by Boston standards, but it's the best Ellsworth has to offer." The afternoon passed pleasantly as Samuel showed Lucille around the town, introducing her to merchants and townspeople as "my wife, Mrs. Carson." Each time he said it, Lucille felt a warm glow of belonging. They visited the general store, where Samuel insisted on buying her a pretty blue hair ribbon as a wedding gift, and the small millinery shop, where the owner fussed over Lucille as the newest bride in the community. Dinner was indeed modest by Boston standards, but the food was well prepared and the atmosphere intimate. As they ate, Samuel spoke more openly than he had before about his hopes for the ranch and their future together. "I want to expand the herd next year," he explained, his eyes alight with plans. "With the railroad making shipping easier, there's good money in beef. Eventually, I'd like to add another section of land to the north. There's good water access there." "It sounds like you have it all thought out," Lucille observed. "I've had plenty of time to plan," Samuel admitted. "Working for others, saving every penny until I could buy my own place." He hesitated before continuing. "I should tell you more about my background." "You have a right to know the man you've married." "I'd like to hear whatever you want to share," Lucille encouraged. Samuel took a sip of his coffee before beginning. "My father was a drunk who abandoned us when I was 8. My mother worked herself to death trying to support us, me and my younger sister Clara. When Mother died, we were separated. Clara went to live with an aunt in St. Louis. I ended up in an orphanage until I was 14, then started working cattle drives." Lucille reached across the table to touch his hand. "I'm sorry you lost your family so young." "It shaped me," Samuel said matter-of-factly, "made me determined to build something that would last, something that was mine." His eyes met hers. "Now ours. Do you ever see your sister?" Lucille asked. "We write occasionally. She's married now, has 3 children." A shadow passed over his face. "I keep meaning to visit, but the ranch always needs attention." "Perhaps we could go together someday," Lucille suggested. "I'd like to meet your sister." Samuel looked surprised, then pleased by the idea. "I'd like that too." As the evening progressed and their conversation continued, Lucille found herself increasingly aware of what awaited them later. Though she had been prepared by her mother for the physical aspects of marriage before leaving Boston, she still felt nervous about the intimacy to come. Samuel must have sensed her thoughts, for as they walked back to the hotel after dinner, he said quietly, "Lucille, I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, we've known each other such a short time. If you need more time to become comfortable with me, I understand." His consideration only deepened her affection for him. "Thank you," she replied softly. "But we are husband and wife now. I may be nervous, but I'm not afraid." The look he gave her, then a mixture of desire and tenderness, made her heart race. By the time they reached their hotel room, Lucille's nervousness had transformed into anticipation. The room was simple but clean, with a large bed dominating the space. A small vase of wildflowers sat on the dresser, another thoughtful touch that Lucille suspected was Samuel's doing. Alone together for the first time as husband and wife, they stood in momentary awkwardness, the reality of their situation suddenly immediate. Then Samuel stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "I want to be a good husband to you," he said earnestly. I may not be demonstrative in my feelings, but I want you to know that I already care for you deeply, Lucille, more than I expected to so quickly." "I feel the same," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel raised one hand to gently touch her cheek. "May I kiss you?" Properly this time, without the reverend watching. Lucille nodded, and Samuel lowered his mouth to hers. Unlike the brief kiss at the church, this one was unhurried, a gentle exploration that gradually deepened as Lucille responded to him. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and she found her own arms winding around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathing more rapidly. Samuel rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "You're trembling," Lucille observed softly. "So are you," he countered, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. "I didn't expect this," she confessed. "When I agreed to be a mail-order bride, I hoped for respect, maybe friendship. I didn't expect to feel." "Feel what?" Samuel prompted when she hesitated. "So drawn to you," she finished. "So comfortable and yet so affected by your presence." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face. "I had similar hopes, modest ones. I never imagined I would feel this way so soon." His hand caressed her cheek again. "You're a remarkable woman, Lucille Carson." The use of her new name sent a thrill through her. "Say it again," she requested. "Lucille Carson," he repeated, his voice deepening. "My wife." Their next kiss was more urgent, fueled by the acknowledgement of mutual attraction. Lucille felt herself melting into his embrace, all nervousness forgotten as instinct took over. When Samuel's hands began to work on the buttons of her dress, she made no move to stop him. What followed was a night of tender discovery. Samuel proved to be a gentle and considerate lover, attentive to her comfort and pleasure. For Lucille, the experience was a revelation, not the duty she had been prepared to accept, but a joy she had never anticipated. In the quiet aftermath, lying in Samuel's arms with her head on his chest, Lucille marveled at the turn her life had taken. 1 week ago, she had stepped off a train into chaos and danger. Now she was Mrs. Samuel Carson, wife to a man she was rapidly falling in love with, mistress of a ranch that was already beginning to feel like home. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That fate has strange ways," Lucille replied. "If the wildfire hadn't happened, we might have spent weeks being formally polite with each other, slowly getting acquainted." Samuel chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly under her ear. "Instead, we jumped straight into crisis management together." "Exactly." Lucille propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I saw the real Samuel Carson immediately, not the careful man from the letters, but the one who fights for what matters to him. And I saw a woman with more courage and determination than I could have hoped for," Samuel replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "The fire was terrible, but I can't regret that it showed me who you truly are right from the start." Lucille leaned down to kiss him softly. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Samuel Carson." His arms tightened around her. "I know I'm falling in love with you, Lucille Carson." They returned to the ranch the next day to a warm welcome from the hands, true to Mrs. Hollister's word. A small celebration had been prepared, a special dinner. A cake baked with precious sugar saved for the occasion, even a few simple decorations in the main house. The transition to married life proved smoother than Lucille had anticipated. She slipped naturally into the role of managing the household, working alongside Mrs. Hollister and gradually taking over many of the responsibilities. The cook seemed relieved rather than resentful of Lucille's presence, confessing that at 62, she had been finding the work increasingly taxing. Samuel moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse to the main house, sharing the master bedroom with Lucille. Their physical relationship continued to deepen, each night bringing new intimacies and stronger bonds between them. During the days, Samuel returned to the demanding work of running the ranch, but he made efforts to include Lucille in his plans and decisions. He began teaching her about cattle raising, explaining the breeding programs he had implemented, and his strategies for improving the herd's quality. Lucille absorbed this knowledge eagerly, recognizing that her success as a rancher's wife depended on understanding the business that sustained them. Fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and changing the prairie's palette to gold and amber. The burned areas began to show signs of recovery with the first autumn rains, just as Samuel had predicted. The ranch settled into a rhythm of preparation for the coming winter, storing food, repairing buildings, ensuring adequate hay for the cattle. It was late October when Lucille first suspected she might be expecting a child. She had missed her monthly cycle and experienced subtle changes in her body that she recognized from observing other women in her family. She waited another week to be certain before sharing the news with Samuel. They were sitting in front of the fireplace after dinner, Samuel reading a newspaper while Lucille worked on mending one of his shirts. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, how quickly this had become normal, how right it felt to be here with him. "Samuel," she said, setting aside her sewing, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately attentive to the serious note in her voice. "What is it?" "I believe I'm going to have a baby," Lucille said, watching his face carefully. "In late spring, probably May or June." For a moment, Samuel sat perfectly still, the newspaper forgotten in his hands. Then a smile unlike any Lucille had seen before spread across his face, radiant with joy and wonder. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. He set the newspaper aside and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation," Lucille replied, her own smile growing in response to his evident happiness. Samuel placed a gentle hand on her stomach, still flat beneath her dress. "Our child," he said softly. Then he looked up at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you." "For what?" Lucille asked, touched by his emotion. "For coming here, for staying, for giving me a family." His voice caught slightly. "I've been alone for so long, Lucille. Even with the men around, even with the ranch keeping me busy, I was alone, and now I'm not." Lucille cupped his face in her hands, deeply moved by his vulnerability. "You'll never be alone again," she promised. "Neither of us will." That night, Samuel held her with a new tenderness, his hand occasionally drifting to rest protectively over her stomach. In the darkness, he spoke of his hopes for their child, a boy or girl. He didn't care which, as long as they were healthy and strong. "We'll need to prepare a nursery," he said, his practical nature asserting itself even in his excitement. "The small bedroom next to ours would be perfect, and I should hire an extra hand to help with the spring work so I can be available when the baby comes." Lucille smiled at his planning. "We have time," she reminded him. "Several months yet." "I know," Samuel acknowledged, "but I want everything to be perfect. You and the baby will have everything you need, I promise." The promise warmed Lucille's heart. She had no doubt that Samuel would move heaven and earth to keep it. As winter descended on the prairie, the ranch became a cocoon of warmth and preparation. Samuel announced the coming baby to the ranch hands, who responded with genuine excitement and immediately began planning their own contributions, one offering to craft a cradle, another promising to break the gentlest horse for the child when they were old enough to ride. Lucille wrote to her family in Boston with the news, receiving enthusiastic responses and promises to visit when travel became easier in the summer. She also encouraged Samuel to write to his sister Clara, sharing their happiness. The reply came swiftly. Clara was overjoyed and planned to visit in the spring around the time of the baby's arrival. Christmas at the ranch was a modest but joyful affair. Samuel surprised Lucille with a beautiful rocking chair for the nursery, handcrafted by a furniture maker in Ellsworth. Lucille gave him a leather-bound journal she had ordered from Boston, embossed with his initials and the ranch's brand. "For your plans and dreams," she explained as he ran his fingers over the fine leather. "So our children will know what you built for them." Samuel's expression at the mention of children plural made Lucille laugh. "Yes," she confirmed, answering his unspoken question. "I hope this will be the first of several if you're agreeable." His kiss was answer enough. January brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. The enforced closeness only strengthened Samuel and Lucille's bond as they spent long evenings talking, playing chess, or simply enjoying each other's company. Lucille's pregnancy progressed normally, her slight frame gradually rounding with new life. It was during one of these snowbound evenings that Samuel shared more of his past with her, speaking of his childhood hardships and the years of working for others while saving for his own land. "There were times I nearly gave up," he admitted. "Times when it seemed impossible that I'd ever have enough to start my own ranch. But I couldn't let go of the dream." "What kept you going?" Lucille asked, genuinely curious about the source of his determination. Samuel considered the question. "Partly stubbornness," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "But mostly a promise I made to my mother before she died. She told me to build something lasting, something that would give meaning to the struggles we'd endured." His hand found Lucille's, resting on her growing belly. "Now I understand what she meant more than ever." Spring arrived with its usual drama on the prairie: sudden thaws, mud that seemed bottomless, and the frantic activity of calving season. Samuel hired 2 additional hands as he had planned, ensuring the ranch continued to run smoothly as Lucille's time grew nearer. Clara arrived from St. Louis in early May, a petite, dark-haired woman with Samuel's blue eyes. The reunion between brother and sister was emotional, with Samuel marveling at how much Clara resembled their mother, and Clara tearfully embracing the brother she hadn't seen in years. Clara and Lucille bonded quickly, with the experienced mother of 3 offering practical advice and reassurance about the impending birth. She also brought family stories that helped Lucille understand Samuel even better, tales of his protectiveness toward his sister even as a child, his serious nature that occasionally gave way to unexpected mischief. The baby arrived on a perfect May morning, heralded by a dawn chorus of birdsong. The labor was difficult but uncomplicated, with Clara and Mrs. Hollister attending while Samuel paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. When the first cry rang out, Samuel burst into the room despite the women's protests. "You have a son," Clara announced, placing the swaddled infant in Lucille's arms. Samuel approached the bed with uncharacteristic hesitation, his usual confidence momentarily abandoned. When Lucille held out the baby to him, he took the small bundle with hands that trembled slightly. "Hello, son," he whispered, staring in wonder at the tiny face. Then he looked at Lucille, love and gratitude shining in his eyes. "He's perfect. You're perfect." They named him William Samuel Carson after Lucille's father and Samuel himself. As spring turned to summer, little William became the center of the ranch's attention. Doted on by his parents and the extended family of ranch hands who had appointed themselves honorary uncles. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, often carrying William with him around the ranch for short periods, pointing out cattle and horses to the infant as if he could understand. In the evenings, he would sit in the rocking chair he had given Lucille, holding his son while telling him stories of the land that would someday be his. On the anniversary of Lucille's arrival, Samuel arranged a special dinner just for the two of them, with Mrs. Hollister watching William for the evening. He led Lucille to the highest point on the ranch property, where he had set up a picnic overlooking the western pasture, now lush and green again, with no visible sign of the previous year's fire. 1 year ago today, you stepped off a train into smoke and chaos, Samuel said, pouring glasses of wine for them both. I've often wondered if you would have come if you'd known what awaited you. I've never regretted it, Lucille assured him, accepting the wine. Not for a moment. Samuel raised his glass in a toast. To the wildfire that brought us together. To new beginnings born from adversity, Lucille countered, touching her glass to his. As they shared the meal and watched the sunset paint the sky in colors reminiscent of that first dangerous day, Samuel grew thoughtful. I never told you, he said eventually, but the day you arrived, before I knew about the fire, I almost didn't go to meet your train. Lucille looked at him in surprise. Why not? Fear, Samuel admitted. Plain and simple. I was afraid you would take one look at me at this modest ranch and regret your decision immediately. He shook his head at the memory. I sat in this very spot for an hour trying to gather my courage. What changed your mind? Jim found me here. Said, boss, that girl traveled halfway across the country on nothing but the strength of your letters. Least you can do is show up to meet her. Samuel chuckled. He was right, of course. I'm glad you listened to him, Lucille said, reaching over to take his hand. Though I wonder what would have happened if the fire hadn't forced us into immediate cooperation. Samuel's fingers intertwined with hers. I'd like to think we would have found our way to this regardless, he said. But the fire certainly sped things along. It showed me who you truly are, Lucille agreed. Not just the careful words in your letters, but the man who would ride into danger to save a stranger, who would fight to protect what he had built, who could lead others through crisis with steady determination. And it showed me that the poised Boston lady was also a fighter, Samuel replied, his eyes warm with admiration. Someone who didn't run from challenge but faced it head-on. Someone who belonged here, even if she didn't know it yet. As darkness fell, they gathered their picnic things and walked back toward the house, arms around each other's waists. The ranch spread out below them, peaceful in the gathering dusk. Smoke rose from the chimney of their home, and lights glowed in the windows, a beacon of warmth and belonging. I love you, Samuel said suddenly, stopping to turn Lucille toward him. More than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Lucille replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. My cowboy who saved me from a wildfire and gave me a home. In the years that followed, the Carson ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. William was joined by 2 sisters and another brother, filling the once quiet house with laughter and activity. The wildfire that had marked Lucille's arrival became a family legend, retold on anniversaries and special occasions, the dramatic beginning to a love that had grown from unusual circumstances into something enduring and profound. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Lucille would find Samuel on the porch, looking out over the land he had fought so hard to protect. She would join him there, slipping her hand into his, sharing the moment of peaceful contemplation. Any regrets? He asked her once, on the 10th anniversary of her arrival. Lucille shook her head, leaning against his solid strength. Not one, she replied truthfully. The mail-order bride who arrived during a wildfire found exactly where she was meant to be. Samuel's arm tightened around her shoulders. So did the cowboy who saved her, he said softly. So did he.